today's video, we're going to discuss cell division. And before we do, I want to remind you about the cell structures. So the cell itself plays a huge role in your own health and your own well-being because you are made up of cells. What we're going to look at is how one cell can become two cells and even why one cell needs to ever replicate. So going back to what the cell theory is, the cell theory states that all life contains cells. And the second part of the cell theory states that cells arise from pre-existing cells. That means that in order for one cell to have ever existed, it had to come from a previous cell. And here we have one cell that divides and becomes two cells, and this cell right here is identical to the original cell. And cell division plays this huge role because now we see those two cells becoming 4, and then those 4 cells becoming 8, and then you can imagine this will keep on going from 8 to 16 and 16 to 32 as you're developing from an embryo. And we all at one point were unicellular. We all were the egg from your mother and the sperm from your father was joined to become a zygote, and that was one cell, so that was your beginning, and then you eventually became multicellular through the process of cell division. And so the major thing to note in cell division is that it's necessary for cell growth, and development. It's also necessary for maintenance of your own cells. So if you ever need to repair your tissues, it's really important for repairing. And it's also important for reproduction. So if we wanted to reproduce, or other organisms wanted to reproduce, they need to undergo cell division in order to accomplish that. So those are some of the major functions of cell division. Okay, so now let's look at cell division and how it can differ between the two types of cells that we know, or the two types of cells that exist. And so the two types of cells, so you should be thinking prokaryotes, and the other type of cell is the eukaryotic organism, and these are the micrographs that I showed you in class that depict prokaryotes and eukaryotes over here. If you remember the domains of life, the 3 major domains were bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. And red indicates that these guys are prokaryotes, and the green indicates that it's eukaryotes. So when you think of eukaryotes versus prokaryotes, you should be able to tell me those differences between a eukaryotic organism and a prokaryotic organism. So now taking this and understanding, okay, so there are 2 types of cells, and the 2 types of cells are prokaryotes and eukaryotes. So these 2 domains here. So these are all the prokaryotes, okay? And the eukaryotes have their own domain. The reason why I'm emphasizing this, well, it turns out that prokaryotes undergo a very different type of cell division called binary fission, very different from eukaryotes. So all prokaryotes undergo binary fission. Eukaryotes, however, undergo a process called mitosis. So eukaryotic organisms do not undergo binary fission. Instead, they undergo mitosis. And the other type of cell division that eukaryotes do is called meiosis. And we're going to talk about meiosis a little bit later in the semester when we talk about reproduction. So we're going to leave that aside, and we're just going to emphasize mitosis in the next couple of weeks. So this shows a prokaryotic organism. The DNA is pointing to this circular DNA and then the cell wall and the plasma membrane. The DNA is now replicating, so it's replicating and it pushes to the opposite side of the cell. And now the bacteria cell will pinch off, so it elongates and then pinches off to eventually have 2 identical daughter cells. So it's essentially a clone of the original cell. And bacteria can divide very rapidly, and you can have one bacteria that may enter your gut could replicate millions of times in your own lifetime. And it's pretty amazing and phenomenal at how fast these bacteria can divide. Okay, so now I want to talk about mitosis and how this differs dramatically from binary fission. There's duplicated DNA, and we see these centrioles moving to the opposite sides of the pole, and we see microtubules emanating out and grabbing onto the chromosomes, and then they push the opposite sides, and then we begin to see the nucleus reforming. So it's a very complicated process. I'm going to play that again. It's a very complicated process because we have the nucleus that's involved and these other structures like the centrioles and microtubules that play a dramatic role in organizing these chromosomes and pulling them to the opposite sides of the cell. This is very different from binary fission and a lot more complicated. So we're going to discuss mitosis in more detail, but not in this video. I will leave that there. Keep studying, and I hope that was helpful.